exploring the bizarre. Your e-ticket ride into the world of the paranormal. Strap yourself in as we traverse the universe exploring the unexplained. UFOs, ghosts, lost worlds, cryptozoology, as well as other dimensions. It's time to take back the night. Now, your electrifying hosts of Exploring the Bizarre, Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz.
Here we go with another storm. It's a stormy night, but we're going to bring you an exciting program as we usually do once a week on Exploring the Bizarre. And tonight I'm really excited because for me this is an old-fashioned flying saucer show.
There you go.
No lights in the sky. No, indeed, we've got them right on the ground, recovered, retrieved, and possibly along with a couple of extraterrestrials, or occupants at least. And no, this is not about Roswell. There'll be no Roswell Slides here. We're talking about the real McCoy with our featured guest tonight, Harry Drew, who lives in Kingman, Arizona, and for the last 10 years as a historian and a local researcher has been investigating the case of a UFO retrieval circa 1953. And, of course, I want to introduce my co-host, Tim Swartz, who's out there in Jasper, Indiana. How you doing this week, Tim?
Well, I'm doing great, and I'm really excited to be talking with Harry tonight because, you know, a lot of people they may be familiar with the whole Roswell crash scenario, but the majority have no idea that there's been other supposed cases of crashed UFOs throughout the years. So,
well,
it'd be great.
Yeah, and in fact, you know, I've been a collector of stories about UFO crashes. Doesn't necessarily mean that I buy into each and every one of them. In fact, there's one case where a UFO supposedly crashed in Central Park back in the early 1950s. I presented my evidence, and I use the word evidence in quotes, in a book called The Case for UFO Crashes from Legend to Reality. And we have one more guest this evening, and I want to bring him in because he's an old-time friend and associate of mine. Out there in Cleveland, Ohio, is Mr. Rick Hilberg, who is one of the originators and founders of the National UFO Conference, also known as the Congress of Scientific Ufology. In fact, we recently got together some of the old gang and put our heads together and rubbed antenna and discussed where ufology has taken us in the last 5 decades. Rick, is that how long we've been doing this?
Yeah, Tim, it's been that long for sure. As a matter of fact, I think I first contacted you by mail. It has to have been back in 1962, so it's been a heck of a long time.
Yeah, well, you know, I think I found the other day I was going through my very dusty files, and where I think we all started communicating with each other was because we read Ray Palmer's Flying Saucers magazine.
Mm-hmm, yes.
It was a little digest. Well, it started out as a larger size publication, but it was a little digest when we first started reading it. And they had a flying saucer news column in there. And we were able to invite other people to correspond with us. If we had a UFO group, we could throw in free ads and information about our organization. And so we were just kids. I mean, basically we were kids, Rick, right? We were 14, 15 years old when we got started in this. And now we're collecting Social Security and spending most of the day, when we're not on the air, doing shows and researching in our recliners and watching the Yankees baseball game. Or at least that's what I'm
Yeah.
doing anyway.
Well,
So,
but that's what you're doing. But what we here in this area, we watch the Cleveland Indians. It's been very frustrating. So, okay. But yeah, I mean, there was a huge teen ufology movement back in those days. Of course, there was teen this and that. That was the rage. Were magazines aimed at teenagers, but for some reason, a lot of teenage boys got interested in UFOs, and we all, as you said, we wandered into the pages of Palmer's Flying Saucers magazine, and we, that's how we hooked up and got together.
well, I figure we were all born around 1947.
Yeah.
Which maybe we came in with the UFO crash at Roswell. Who knows? But we certainly came in during that early period when UFOs were they weren't even called UFOs then. When flying saucers were fresh on everybody's mind. So I think that probably we grew up reading the books of Major Donald E. Kehoe and Edward Ruppelt, and probably. Shamefully, even to admit that we might have even read a contactee book or two like George Adamski and Buck Nelson and so forth. And it took us years to probably really dig down and get a little bit more serious about all of this. But we're still in the fry, and we're still here investigating, and we're still here communicating with our audience of listeners on Exploring the Bizarre on the KCOR Digital Radio Network. But Rick, I wanted to start out with you because you met the man. You met Leonard Stringfield, who was, I don't want to say the inventor, but certainly the person who put UFO crash retrievals on the map. Now, he lived in Cincinnati.
Yes.
Is that right? Okay.
That's right. He lived in Cincinnati. He was a local businessman. A veteran of the Air Corps. He was, I believe, a tail gunner in World War II bombers. A very successful guy, and he got interested in the UFO phenomenon and took it from there. He had a local organization with CRIFO. I can't recall what the acronym stood for, but he published a number of newsletters and a book way back when. And,
I think the book is still sought after. It's a UFO Blue something or other.
Inside Saucer Post 30 Blue.
There you go. I knew it had blue in it somewhere along the.
Line, yes. But he was a great collector.
Yes, but he also was one of the only saucer groups that actually had a direct telephone line to the military.
That's right. That's right. As a matter of fact, some local, as the story goes, as he alleges, some local Air Force outpost or something at one of the local Air Force bases decided to have him help run down, UFO reports for him. So he was getting inside information from the Air Force allegedly, and going out and making contacts. But at the time, he claims he was unable to reveal this. It was only when his book came out, 30 Blue, I think that was about 1956 or 1957 or thereabouts, wherein he actually, mentioned that fact. But he did, yes, he did actually solicit reports in the newspapers and the local, radio, TV, whatever, for people to contact him. Much like other hotlines operated in the country. We had one here in Cleveland several times, and other cities had them too. I'm sure there was one in New York as well. Yes.
Well, now Ohio was a hotbed of UFO activity. Not just sightings. There were certainly enough sightings to go around. But you also had a number of very active UFO groups. You had the Cleveland Ufology Project, which is still
around.
In fact, Tom has been on with me to discuss
Tom Wortman,
the subject. Yes, very, very good, very dedicated researcher. There was another group in Akron.
Flying Saucer Investigating Committee. Yeah,
oh, yes.
There were actually two different groups. There were really two, and probably even three. There was the Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company had sponsored company clubs and groups for their employees and encouraged them and gave them a meeting space and everything. And there was actually a UFO group that was in existence for 4 or 5 years at Goodyear. So there were really three UFO groups.
that might explain why one of the aliens looked like the Michelin Man or something.
Yeah, yeah. There have been a lot of those. You funny, you mentioned one, but there have been a huge number of cases describing entities that look like the Michelin Man.
There you go. But do you know how Leonard? Now you conversed with him several times. You met him. How did he get into the UFO retrieval aspect? I think that was certainly prior to even Roswell being on the map. I mean, we might have heard about Roswell. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
No one heard about Roswell. As a matter of fact, Stringfield, he was a collector of reports. He solicited these reports that come in, much like we did, much like the late Al Manick did when he was chairman of the Cleveland Ufology Project. We had a hotline that went into his home, 24 hours a day, whatever, 7 days a week. He was there. His wife Joyce would answer the phone, whatever. We had one here. I had one in my home for a number of years, et cetera, et cetera. And that's what Stringfield did. And he got all kinds of calls, and Al did too. And I mean, I even got a phone call that I wrote up for you, way back around 1980 or 1981, about a fellow from NASA, from the Lewis Research Center, who called me, and with a really strange tale to tell. It involved retrieved UFOs, so with NASA. So I mean, there's just whenever you go out and give a lecture, or whenever you have a hotline, you're going to get these calls, and that's what happened to Stringfield. And he, for some reason or other, they interested him because he had a number of witnesses who he considered were quite credible.
Well, now how many UFO crashes or retrievals would you say there were in Ohio?
Oh, claims of probably 4 or 5 good ones. I mean, you go back into the chronology, and they go back as early, probably the first, several are like in 1952. I recall this was in the late summer, north of Columbus. Matter of fact, the old buddy Jim Mosley, I think, even wrote this up in Saucer News way back in the Dark Ages. It turns out there was a woman named Vivian Walton. She allegedly worked for the Signal Corps, and she decoded, as she claims, a classified message that told of a crash near Columbus, Ohio. Later on, a co-worker of hers in the same department showed her photographs of the object, which she described as being like 30 feet in diameter with almost no damage on it, pristine. And allegedly, this photographer had some information on this, and he told her that the retrieval team that went from the Air Force to recover it had trouble entering the object, whatever it was, and it was unoccupied. And as the story goes, the craft was later taken to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base for further study. So that's probably the first such incident regarding an alleged crash in Ohio. And this, as I said, was the late summer of '52.
And which one would you say? You say there were 3 or 4 of them. Do you think is the most credible?
Well, again, credible. Now there you go, because in all of these instances, Tim, it all comes down to the fact that you're talking about witness testimony. How credible can you establish this witness as being? And quite oftentimes, it's the person who you speak with, who you talk to, is not the one who actually participated in the alleged recovery or whatever, or saw this, or stumbled upon it, or whatever the case may be. It's usually someone else.
It's kind of like a hand-me-down. A hand-me-down or a third person or something like that. Now,
exactly.
We were discussing or exchanging information earlier today about an incident that I wrote up in my UFO crash book that took place in Ohio, where a group of people saw an object hovering over a shopping center. Yeah, and it was seen to, I guess, explode, but silently in the air. And the police did say that they had received a number of reports on that particular night, but once the object was gone, some people said it was a bolide or a meteorite or something to that effect, Although the main witness who I interrogated or interviewed at the time did not seem to think that that was the case. He did not think that it was a mundane, meteor or something along that line. Some people suggested, well, maybe it was a balloon because it didn't make any sound when it seemingly exploded. Except a couple of weeks later, when he was mowing the grass in his yard, he found this huge chunk of, and I don't know what to call it, but it weighed, I think he said, about 12 pounds, and it kind of looked like glass, but it wasn't glass. And it was passed around to NASA, and it was passed around to other universities and stuff, laboratory testing and all, and nobody could actually kind of pinpoint where it came from or what it was. I mean, it wasn't something that you could say was exclusively from another planet. It wasn't an unknown, a mineral or anything like that. But it was something that didn't belong, certainly in this fellow's backyard. So he lived rather close to the shopping mall where they had first seen the object, and then later on they moved to his backyard when he saw the thing explode. Members of his family and I think some neighbors there. So that's an intriguing case. And I did find during my investigation of these so-called retrievals that there were cases out there that needed investigating. I mean, not just Roswell, but things that kind of have slipped through our fingers because of lack of funding. That's a good thing, right? I mean, it takes time and effort and research to get to the bottom of these things, and they interview witnesses and to travel and so forth. And of course, most of us have had to have regular jobs. Now, I've been very lucky over the years because I've been one of the few who have actually survived on publishing. I mean, publishing magazines. I did UFO Universe that lasted for 11 years. I still bring out books, not so many UFO books these days, but I'm still a fairly successful publisher in this day of self-publishing and 4 million books being available through Amazon. But we continue on. But I want to bring in now our featured guest for this evening, Harry Drew, because Harry lives in Kingman, Arizona. And for the last 10 years or so, he has been investigating a case that was swept under the rug for some reason. Anytime he brought up the story about a UFO crash or retrieval outside of the town of Kingman in the desert, people would just kind of brush it aside or say, oh, it was undocumented and there are no witnesses and so forth and so on. Well, I first talked to Harry, I guess maybe a year ago, and I did an interview with him that lasted a couple of hours, and I was most impressed, to say the least. Now, I know quite a few things have happened since our last conversation, but of course there are many, many listeners out there who are not familiar with the Kingman UFO story because it has not been presented at, I think, the MUFON conferences and all these places where stories seem to be shared and fake UFO Roswell slides are presented. So, Harry, welcome to Exploring the Bizarre.
Good evening.
How are you doing tonight?
I'm doing very well. It sounds like all of you are as well.
Well, we're doing our best. I was blessed by the Pope today. He passed within a block or so. So I guess I guess we'll survive the evening. But Harry, give us a little bit about your background. Now, you don't claim to be a ufologist. You're a historian. Is that correct?
That is correct. I do not make a claim that I am a ufologist. I have been an author and historian 45 years. My books are on Amazon as well about history, general history, and specific things. I am a cultural resource specialist in ancient civilizations, and I'm a director of museums of history, anthropology, and archaeology. So this is kind of like being from Missouri times 10. You have to show me. So with that, I moved to Arizona, and right in the heart of where the Kingman UFO story was alive and well. I had heard, I should say story, bits and pieces, because that's all it really was. And some people said, well, Aztec was probably more possible than that, or something over the border into Mexico. But they're all in a line that comes right over this direction to Kingman, Arizona. And it so happened that I talked with a museum curator who had spent 20 years out in the desert, off and on, best he could, looking for a crash site. But it wasn't the one so much that everyone had created stories about. And he had the opportunity to interview a man who goes unnamed. I know all these things, and I have it all documented. Mm-hmm. But this individual created a church and became an ordained minister so that he could counsel Area 51 workers during this time. So they had somebody they could confide in, and the whole idea was so the government couldn't compel the church to divulge anything, and of course they did not. And this elderly minister told the curator where the Red Lake crash was. And that turns out to be the number 2 event that I would find out years and years later, after years of work by myself, doing this out in the desert and climbing across rocky buttes and up the side of the Hualapai Mountain, down to where it goes to the place where it meets the desert floor. And I didn't expect actually to find anything. I was looking for what in the world caused this to come up and why Raymond Fowler got the incredible interview he got from a man by the name of Arthur Stansel. Last name is spelled, this is important for historians, last name is spelled Stansel. He was accused of misspelling his own name by some of the people that I call exaggerators, story creators about UFO crashes. And Raymond Fowler interviewed him in April, May 1973 and did something along the line of a 65-page report. I have a copy of the report that was obtained by the county historian and annotated. In other words, they talked to him on the phone, communicated back and forth, and made notes on the report that aren't on the report, the original report, which Mr. Fowler, who's a tremendous researcher, has since passed on to someone else. So I had some things in it that made sense, and even though this Stansel was accused of not having a secret clearance and was telling stories, it turned out the man was working at Wright-Patterson for 12 years before he was sent to Frenchman Flats and at the atomic bomb blasting test area in the 1950s, and was essentially what we would call now like the bomb blast effect analyst. And he was taken...
Whoa, we're going to have to hold those words for a few minutes because we're due for a very brief break, and we'll be back with Harry Drew, Rick Hilberg, Tim Swartz, and myself, Tim Beckley, in just a few.
Well, this is proof positive that I do field work. In fact, I do a lot of field work, and I've been doing field work all my life. It doesn't do much good to sit at a computer and read things other people write and guess, or I call guesstimate. You need to get out and get out to places based on information you research in legitimate places like museums and research libraries where the information you're looking at hasn't been corrupted by everyone else adding a little spin. This was my 5th trip to the Red Lake UFO crash site. It was the trip to follow the one where my consulting engineer and I went out, and a drone was flown to photograph an area I suspected that was directly connected to the crash. I was right. At the top of the butte, the Red Lake UFO hit that mountaintop and ricocheted off, flew 0.21 miles before it slammed into the desert floor and crashed, and I found both places.
Welcome back to Exploring the Bizarre. I'm Tim Swartz. Tonight we're talking with Harry Drew, and we're talking about crashed UFOs, retrievals, and especially we're talking about the Kingman, Arizona UFO crash. Now, everybody is well aware of Roswell, but I think that, Harry, that a lot of people have no idea about Kingman, Arizona. And in fact, you say you're a historian and not a ufologist. And I mean, what was it about this case that got you interested in it to begin with?
Well, there was enough information. I met locals here in the Kingman area, old-timers. And they really don't talk with outsiders, and I was sort of merged into the community after living here for years, and realizing that I wasn't going around with get ready to pounce on any kind of story. And a few started confiding things. I'd be at a private meeting, and someone would talk about something, and it's like, hello, this is amazing. I'm just hearing this incidental conversation between old-timers who were here, living people from the time. And when I say here, Kingman, 1953, 3,400 people, Mayberry, USA, and is only, in spite of all the exaggerator stories, there were only 2 roads in and out of Kingman, period. And there are things that the historians we have to be staunch about this. If somebody tells a real whopper, 400 years ago, and then the next guy that's supposed to be the expert copies down the whopper, and then the next one, and the next one, by the time it gets to us and we're in college or wherever we hear this thing, we're hearing stuff that was a lie told 400 years ago. Mm-hmm. And somebody finds out something different, they need to do the next step. And Raymond Fowler, interviewing Arthur Stancil, did an impeccable job of research on the man and on the credibility of the man and the background of the man. He was really who he said he was, in spite of any stories that are told today that he's somebody else and spells his name wrong. And what really stood out was nobody had followed up on the ground. And that's where I come in, because I had some things that nobody had paid much attention to, because I'm a historian. And when we go along, if there's a plane and there's 3 rocks, we're going to turn the rocks over, because we want to know if that has anything to do with what's going on out on that plane. And so with that in mind, I started talking more to some of the old-timers, and then I began serious research. When I don't want to bore everybody with all that stuff, but you go into research libraries, you go in your museums, government documents, you look at newspapers and police records and all kinds of things to start getting some kind of documentation to back up what some potential second or third hand witness might say, which you have a credibility gap when you're talking about people that are, by the time they're a third third class or third rate or a third person witness. And I can tell you, like in this particular industry or field, that it seems like the only way you can come out on top, and nobody has to be vetted. Nobody has to have, they don't submit a scientific paper to anybody. You can make up a story and turn it in, and people pay attention, and they need to be more demanding about the credibility of the source for everything that they look at. And so I had those things to consider, and I didn't really pay much attention to Roswell, one way or the other. I had my questions of my own about how anybody, if you have a craft that hits the ground so hard that its debris about the size of the palm of your hand is scattered over a 1 square mile area, how do you have 4 intact corpses from anywhere? Mm-hmm. How did they survive that if the ship couldn't do that? And so, unless it was, who is it? Klaatu, Verada, Nikto? Okay.
That's right.
And it's gored. And there'd be a big hole in the ground where they'd have to dig him out because he wouldn't be damaged. But in the real world, I found that there was a lot of stretch going on, and it was also tied to the era. 1950 technology design concepts of UFOs, like flying saucers and drawings. And I've seen some pictures, cutaways where they have like gears inside, but they were using 1953 technology or 1950 technology to explain how these craft are made, and then they do illustrations. And it's like, instead of, they couldn't do seamless work. That's miraculous. They didn't want to use stove bolts like in a steam-powered locomotive, so they used rounded bolts like a bridge has and rivets, so it's more streamlined looking. And if you go back and look at the early craft, you go from chicken feeders from 1988, or I'm sorry, 1898 Sears catalog, turned into a UFO to hang on a string and photograph, on up to where we are. So I had all of this stuff. So I have misgivings. Everybody should have some misgivings. That's because you need to question the source. And so after I heard this, I started the process of doing the real hard research. There's a person involved in this said that this has been going on for 30 years, okay? He researched all the newspapers within 100 miles of Kingman, including Las Vegas, and never found one single word about the Kingman UFO or anything, any UFOs in 1953. And I thought, wow, that's a pretty big thing. And I checked to see how many newspapers there were. There's only 2. Okay. I was like, okay, well, I'll get out my hiking boots, for that. And so I started checking. And the next thing you know, I've got big glaring front page stories, so there was no research done. It was just a claim. And so these are things, as you keep the process of elimination, it's practical. And it doesn't even have to be scientific, but it's practical to do it that way. And then I had this incredible I've had a number of incredible experiences in the research aspect, and I'll jump right through this. But it came to pass that I interviewed the last surviving member, the last first-hand eyewitness surviving member of the United States Air Force Retrieval team, who had been a young airman. And they were flown here when the first craft went down. I know why they went down. I know where the things were that caused them to go down. The Air Force didn't have any idea they would do that. It was just a byproduct of something else they were doing, and they didn't have the forward look and outcome of what would happen if you do these kind of things. Like it burns the brains out of everybody. And I'm not being callous. It really did damage and cause cancers, that kind of thing, to the brain cancers, to some of the operators of this stuff. They had no idea it would do that, because the whole idea was, and what they were working on was to develop a distance, a range, and the operators were being bombarded.
You're talking about radar?
Yes. Oh, not just radar. Hopped up, really powerful. The microwave short pulse radiation generators for the radar could only do 25 miles at the time. And by coupling them together, if you want, it's very simple. The rule was, it was something you didn't have to put on a blackboard. Double the power, you double the range. And we were looking both barrels right down. The Soviet Union had just detonated an atomic bomb in 1949. The Korean, all the Cold War and Korean War stuff was churning and happening. And then the word came that the Soviet Union was building a long-range nuclear bomber called the Bear, and it could make a polar North Pole flight down over and be able to attack the United States. Would it or would it not? Who knew? But they couldn't take the risk. And our radar can only see 25 miles on the ground. We had a range of 45 miles on the water. How do I know these things? I researched real places, looked at real radar, and I'm a former member of one of the armed services. Didn't hurt, but this kind of thing. So it's just a minute piece that has a big significance. They wanted to get 150 miles, and the engineer that worked with me, and the man has his own corporation. He was the engineer who designed the most modern, most advanced flight control system on Earth that was used with James Cameron for the Mariana Trench dive. He stopped his work to come work with me. Also ran a drone for me, so I could do overflights with cameras to look at the ground where I could no longer see it on the surface because we're getting vegetation growth there. That's happening.
Harry, though, let's go back to 1953.
Go ahead.
What exactly happened? I mean, what did people see? How many people saw it? How big was the craft? And
all right, here we go.
There was somebody inside.
There was a flyway. There's a UFO flyway here. Now, still, there was one then. And people saw what they called flying discs, and some later called flying saucers, and we call them UFOs. But they would go north to south, slightly east, north to the west, south to the east. That was the flight line. It goes right down through Hualapai Valley and Red Lake Desert. Red Lake, Mojave County, Arizona, not to be confused with New Mexico, Red Lake, so that people don't get confused. You can look at, I tell everyone, look on the map. You can see it. And down at the south end, why are they here? Why would they fly here? All the old timers that I've talked with they're so aware of it. It's just kind of very easy, casual. You know, there's an underground base to the south, and they go in and out of there. And one day, the Air Force, which was not here in numbers, they had some portable radar operators and machines here with all these microwave short pulse power units coupled together to boost the power, and they snapped it on, and here came a UFO, and it's coming from the north going south, and the radar was laid out just by chance. It wasn't by design. They laid it out in a triangular formation, one out into the Red Lake Desert, one over by what is called Radar Hill in Kingman, Arizona at this moment. It later would have full-blown, it almost had like a backscatter set up there, right in the middle of town, which was not unhealthy. And then to the east, due east, so you had your triangle, and this craft flew right into it, and they turned it on. And so out in the center, who knows what frequencies the thing was being hit with. These craft, according to more than one witness, I've talked with firsthand eyewitnesses, 2 physicists, okay, an Air Force man and an engineer from the time, okay, who touched this thing. And this is the one that landed 18 May 1953. And 15 witnesses, residents, watched this thing start to come down in a slow decline. It went 7.62 miles before it made a forced landing, and basically in the middle of nowhere. That later would be the bus with the scientists come out. Arthur Stansel's on the bus. The Air Force tells them it's a super secret Air Force plane that went down, and all the cover story starts up. And it came out on the 21st of May, and something incredible happened at 10 a.m. on the same morning that the bus showed up about 8:30. at night. Quarter moon, oh yes. I mean, all these things, I verify each piece. But what really mattered was the first-hand eyewitness. He talked to me about, he couldn't see. None of them could see. They were in the back of a military truck flown from Nellis to Kingman, and there was a couple of Army trucks sitting out here from old Army Corps days or the National Guard. And they put them in it. They covered the back flap. They rode out. They didn't get to see where they were going. I know how the road was then. It isn't now. And they arrived. They were to set up a perimeter. 20 military police with dogs were also brought out. And even though it's a wagon road then, as a wagon road now, they blocked the road off so nobody could go through, including the sheriff and the undersheriff of the county the next day, and who tried to get through, and they wouldn't let them through. But with that, he told me one thing that nobody's ever heard before, and it was a landmark. And I've driven hundreds of miles in the desert in a Jeep, and I've walked and walked in high temperature, cold temperature. For 6 years, I was out in the field, and I found the landmark. And when I knew that was what it was, and I recognized it instantly, I knew exactly from the interview by Raymond Fowler with Arthur Stancil where to go right where the thing landed. The clearing area where they cleared the brush away and where the bus parked is still there. It's clear. Where the craft sat, there is no vegetation growth even now. It's there. And then everything the military left behind, because I arrived 60 years after the Air Force left, like it was just yesterday. And so when I walked in, everything is there. And it had not been, nobody had taken anything. Nobody realizes what it is. And so I had a good chance to do a lot of different kinds of tests. I spent a year off and on going there with all the seasons. I tested it in May because Arthur Stancil himself couldn't understand. He was to determine the forward momentum of the craft and impact speed. And he was trying to figure out, because it was sitting 20 inches, it was sitting at an angle in the ground, and it was about 20 inches into the sand, and he could not see it at night. They had big searchlights, and it was blinding, so he just took it. He was out on a flat plain. He was not. He was in a very slow drain field, very wide, open, slow drain field. And where it sat, 4 inches below the surface in May, there's 4 inches of water. That's why it was 20 inches in the ground. It weighed 5 tons.
So what did the craft look like, Harry?
Take a look on my. There's an excellent rendition of what it looks like. Arthur Stancil drew a picture of it. Well, he told Raymond Fowler, and Raymond Fowler penciled out a picture. That's very correct. Approximately 30 feet in diameter, 14 feet thick in the center. It had an outer lip that goes out around. On the very outer ring of this thing, it was aluminish colored, like buff aluminum. And on the outer edge lip of this disc, there were vertical slots, and they were burnished blue-black, like heat from that. And there were, according to Arthur Stancil, there were no landing gear per se. There were nubs, okay? And the craft was unflyable. Something happened. I cannot tell you what that is because I'll never get close enough to the craft and to the intelligence sources to tell me because it's not supposed to exist. And but I can tell you that it was pretty clear from the inspections by these other people, including one that saw it after it had been finally loaded up on a 38-foot trailer behind an M25 40-ton tank transporter, and it was about to head out for where it was going, and the canvas was pulled back so that this physicist could inspect the craft at his leisure for about an hour. And all of these people didn't know each other, they hadn't met each other, and they were writing down and conveying this kind of response or report independent of each other, And so I was able to get those things. And then you start talking about witness testimony and on-the-ground evidence match, documents match, and documents being generated by people that have zero to do with any of this in the ways you would think. 2 days later, the Red Lake UFO went down. That happened. Craft was coming from the north, headed south towards the flyway and the base. And on my Facebook page, harry.drew.35, you can see like what the craft looks like. It's a front cover of one of my new books, sitting right in front of me here in the office. I'm just not releasing them yet. I'm not. It isn't the time. I've never been in a hurry that way, and because I want to make sure everything, all the I's are dotted and all that. But you can take also a look at my webpage at www.KingmanUFOcrashes.com. Now, the Red Lake craft, it had the same kind of a problem right in front of rancher Leonard Neal, who came up from the Big Sandy in the late 1800s and moved into the Wallapai Valley and Red Lake area around Kingman. And 11 other residents watched this thing go down. It didn't clear a rocky butte that was right in its flight path, and so it ricocheted off the top, just enough to let it hit it, tear up the front of the ship, and then ricochet off over what is called Futank. Later, it's a reservoir that was owned by Leonard Neal to water cattle, livestock. Mm-hmm. And it overshot the reservoir and went and crashed into the desert floor. I found, with the engineer helping with running the drone for me, I found what the curator couldn't find. And I found the impact and the ejecta from where the craft hit the butte, and then 0.21 miles where it augured into the desert floor. Two of the crew suffered extreme, severe, and ultimately fatal lower extremity injuries. They died in the infirmary at Nellis. The other two were taken with the first four from the landing craft who were healthy up to Groom Lake. This is not Area 51 yet. It was a former Army Air Corps airfield that was handed off to Edwards Air Force Base as a research extension, which is probably what it still is, I would think. And so things that are like skunk works and that kind of stuff go on up there.
Now,
Okay.
we're coming up on a break in just a few minutes. But, Harry, I want to ask you, now, we're talking about two separate incidents, correct? How many witnesses are there for these events, and are any of them still living today?
42 witnesses, and I'm only aware of one that's still living. The last one of the main group that was a witness of two of these passed away while I was being flown back to the MUFON National Symposium in 2012. After we negotiated a couple times, I declined. I wasn't going to go because I didn't want any of my stuff out yet. I wasn't done with the work. And so in a very unusual move, they actually voted and waived all speaker requirements. So nothing had to be turned over because I'm not handing over my notes or even the video that was shot of me is supposed to be archived.
Now, you do have videotaped interviews with some of these witnesses, correct?
Yes, I most certainly have them. Yes, of course. Mm-hmm. You know that what I'm looking at is it will go in at least 2 different museums in 2 different states when I'm done, where this stuff will go. It needs to be maintained in a way. It can't be where we set up a picnic ground out at these places and have people come and pick up everything that's ever been there. And more research needs to be done, I would think. I know from my own findings from like compression tests, soil porosity tests, radiation tests, and a bunch of other stuff that, you know, that there's nothing there now that indicates any kind of harm to anybody going there. But there are some other considerations. Like I mentioned a few days ago, someone from Las Vegas had been able to get through to me And
all right, Harry, we're going to have
you
to
can't go
interrupt
dig
you
up these places.
because we have to go on to our break. So
Yeah.
you're listening to Exploring the Bizarre.
Yeah.
And we'll be back in just a few minutes, and we'll be talking with Rick Hilberg, Harry Drew, and Tim Swartz, and myself, Tim Beckley, on the KCOR Digital Radio Network. Out of Las Vegas.
And we are back for the second hour of Exploring the Bizarre. I'm Tim Swartz with Tim Beckley, and tonight yes, a round of applause. And tonight we're talking about crashed UFOs. We've got Harry Drew online talking about the Kingman, Arizona UFO crash. And if you have any questions for us, just feel free to contact us. We have all kinds of different ways. We want to hear your questions. We want to hear from you.
Yeah,
So,
I want to ask Rick a few questions, because I want to keep our listeners on pins and needles to hear the rest of Harry's story. But Rick, okay, you mentioned the incidents that took place in Ohio in your conversations with Leonard Stringfield. Do you think that he was being sincere about this, or did he just believe every UFO retrieval that came his way?
Well, he was being sincere. Yes, I really believe so. But see, we have to go back into the time machine a bit and go back to when this really started, 1978. He was doing the MUFON Symposium, which was in Dayton, Ohio, that July, back in '78. And he had built up a lot of publicity saying that he was going to present cases. He would have definite proof of crashed UFOs, multiple cases and whatnot. And I was in attendance, as was Lady Almanic, Bob Easley, and some of the other gang from Ohio and elsewhere. And we were down there with bated breath, really waiting to hear, getting these revelations. Okay, let's see the proof. Let's see it. And he really didn't have it. He didn't have it. He had a number of abstracts that he read. And again, there's where Leonard came in with some of the second, third-hand information, and that's basically what we're going on. So I think that kind of discredited him a little bit. Then he, as you said, Tim, he started to listen to other people, and people, the stories would build and build and build like a snowball effect, and he would publish them and put them in the future. He did 4 or 5 different booklets in a series of all these different crashes, and I think his credibility was somewhat tarnished after that point. But he does have a lot of good information, a lot of good stories in there, and if enough, if you hear enough things from enough people, like I have heard, I had a really bizarre incident that called into the hotline here. It doesn't mention a specific crash, but it does mention the fact that NASA had some sort of knowledge of what was going on.
Of course, now, the UFO crashes, stories about them at least, go back to the 1897 flap. The first one, I guess, got any notoriety, and it's always been a controversial one, with some people saying that it really took place, and some people saying it was just a fake news report. Would be the Aurora, Texas incident, where the UFO came down and lobbed the top off of
Judge Proctor's windmill.
That's correct. Yes, and of course they have been looking for the grave of the alien body ever since.
Yes.
Then, of course, there was a case. Rick, do you know about this one in, I guess, the 1930s, where a minister was supposed to have given the last rites?
Yeah, that was somewhere in the Midwest, Missouri, I believe it was.
That's correct.
Cape Girardeau is where it was.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think it was what the daughters of at least one of the daughters of the minister said that she remembered the case.
That
and
happens a lot.
Yeah, then I remember an episode, and I've been trying to track this down, and I haven't been able to find it, that took place in the 1940s. I believe it was 1945, where an object came down. Now, I say came down or crashed. that's kind of splitting hairs. Now, supposedly the object at Roswell came down and it blew apart, so that's a crash. The one at Kingman is more of a hard landing, perhaps, but some of the other ones were crashes, and some of them were landings where the object just could not get up off the ground again. There was one that supposedly took place in Hawaii around 1945, but I cannot find it on the internet somewhere. But I did have many years ago a booklet, a mimeographed booklet, stapled saddle stitch thing that was printed on the subject. Of course, a lot of the material from the early 1950s is gone. Nobody has it, or if it is, it's locked up, in some secret library somewhere. Even the Roswell incident, they claim, well, nobody heard about it until Stanton Friedman. Yeah. But that's not true either, because I have a book out on this British researcher by the name of Harold T. Wilkins, who wrote Flying Saucers on the Attack, Flying Saucers Landed on the Moon, whatever his titles were. And he had it, not a lot of material there, but he mentioned the case and a few other episodes in one of his early books from around 1955 or 56. But, research into the subject, there aren't very many researchers like Harry, who get onto a case and actually spend a decade investigating it, Exactly. And I can't blame it. I can't blame it on the researchers per se, because everybody has their own life to lead, and you got to go out and work and make a living. And probably your wife or your mate probably is against the subject to begin with. So you're kind of getting an uphill battle. But certainly there've been a lot of UFO stories about crashes. How many of them are true? Maybe we'll never know. I mean, it's possible that we just may never have the answer to this, because it seems like a lot of them took place in the early 1950s, and most of the people that were around in those days are no longer with us. Now, Tim, we've got some questions that have been sent in. You want to go over some of these?
Yeah, sure. We have one that, let's see, it comes from, oh gosh, how do you pronounce it? How do you pronounce that name? Is it Bill Uhouse from Vegas? Oh, no, this is from Charles in Las Vegas, and he says that Bill Uhouse from Las Vegas talked about EBs from, I guess it means the Kingsman craft being brought to Area 51 and help back engineer our I suppose, our UFO technology. How truthful was Bill, and did you ever interview him? And this is for Harry. Are you familiar with Bill Uhouse, Harry?
I am. That's a good question. I've been looking at it here. I have interviews with and from Bill Uhouse that were presented to me with exclusive use. Okay, I didn't interview him, but the questions asked are the questions I needed answered. To give me a better idea. First off, the way this whole thing dresses out is that the Kingman UFO that landed, did not crash, wasn't shot by rockets, hit by lightning, as some of the stories happen in all of this. It was and is the UFO that is the basis for the entire Area 51 UFO story. That's it. It's intact. It wasn't a scratch on this thing. And Bill is right. He wasn't part of the retrieval. Okay? He was.
Now, who was Bill Uhouse? He was not the movie producer, was he?
No, actually, he was an interested person in ufology. My understanding, it was a captain in the Air Force or Air Corps at one point in time. He was a civil engineer. And he did work at what we now call Area 51, or have called for 30 years. And as a byproduct of that, had to do with handling the incoming, as another one of my witnesses said, the redesign and changing of the old Army Air Corps base with black money, black budget money, until they were fully funded in 1955. And it was part of preparing to take care of downed discs and any of the crews. And that was the upshot, at least from two U.S. Air Force colonels to me, okay, from the era, and independently. And so there was, and Bill knew something that gave away what he was talking about, had to have some basis of fact, because he speaks in one of the interviews I have where he happens to mention, and this really runs counter to the stories going out where there's so many people convinced that the Kingman UFO went down over somewhere by the airport, and that's not true. And in fact, a good friend of mine, a science fiction writer, international science fiction writer, Steve Bell, who lives in Rome, wrote a story based on that, and it took off, and it became like the facts. And he's a science fiction writer, and he does a marvelous job. But Bill Uhouse mentioned it went down over by the Surbats, okay, and that only can mean one place, which was completely across the valley floor, the Red Lake Desert, from the side it's being claimed. And you could only know that. I know that. I found the impact area, and the Air Force swept the place twice after they excavated as much of the craft they could get out, because it rained pieces of UFO, a terrestrial craft, a scout ship. This was not an interstellar vehicle. Mm-hmm. It went to an aircraft carrier. People call them a mothership now, or it went to a base out of everybody's sight, because these things were not the kind of thing that they were showing around. And they had been living with basically bare skin, stone knife civilization, and all of a sudden these guys turn on all this radar, and in our world, we messed up their avionics or something, and the craft went down, and a control, like Arthur Stantz was saying, a control fall, 8 feet per second. Okay, the normal gravity, if you take a pencil and just drop it, that's 32 feet per second per second. If you get high enough up, like the man did a year ago, you actually break the speed of sound jumping out of a balloon. Mm-hmm. As you fall, you would continue to accelerate. 8 feet per second meant it had propulsion of some kind. It wasn't in free fall. And so the answer is, how exact in all points Bill Uhouse is giving a story that has complete veracity, I can't attest to. I can tell you there's enough there, independently linked to things that I dug up in my research, and based on logistics that match nobody else has used prior to him. Okay? So I think you should listen to it. And when you say how truthful, I'm telling you that the older people get, as a rule, when you do as a museum or a historical facility does oral interviews, the older the person gets, we have a tendency, human beings, that we kind of elaborate a little bit, or certain things we remember a little bit more fluently than others, and so we kind of stretch facts sometimes. I don't mean we're telling fibs. So you embellish stories. From the interviews that I have with Bill Uhouse, he's 50-ish, and he's speaking pretty straight, okay, including things on the ground that match what he said that nobody had been talking about. Okay, so how do you know that?
Now, we have a question here from Chris, who lives in California, and they want to know, there was a report that the craft had only 2 seats, but there was a report that 4 bodies were found. Now, that gets into the area of the aliens, or let's call them, I call them ultra-terrestrials, because gosh knows where they're coming from, unless you do. Can you describe what the occupants look like, how many of them there were, and what happened to them? I
can answer Chris's question immediately, and then give you the other you're after. Number one, for Chris in California, what you're talking about is an extrapolation that came out of Arthur Stansel's interview. Arthur Stansel made it very clear he never looked in the craft. He did say that somewhere along the line, going back to the bus, and military police had already told them, none of the scientists, 40 of them, were not to speak to each other about anything. This was all top secret. And one of the people said that he thought that he had heard from someone that there was a couple of seats inside. Arthur Stanson was very clear in the interview saying that there was a light coming from inside the craft. The door's open, it's 8:30 at night, it's dark except for a quarter moon, and it's too bright to even see into the craft. He says this in the interview. But this other thing is mentioned in passing, supposedly by someone else, and the MP told the guy to shut up and get back to the bus. And so authentication, there is none. There is no confirmation that there's lots of wild, crazy stories told about this. Okay, an alien dead on impact, and then an alien woman ran off in the middle of the night, and the remaining aliens with ray guns had a fight with the retrieval team until their power packs went out and went dead, and then they just raised their hands and surrendered. Okay, I mean, this is some really ludicrous stuff, and some of this is in book form, and it's available right now. The other part of the question you asked me was about who they are or what they are. I can't tell you where they're from. I wish I knew, but I can tell you the description of a almost petrified, terrified retrieval team member when they pulled up, and there were 4 crew members standing outside of the vehicle that wouldn't operate right, and they were in the middle of no place. And they were described as human, he said, and breathlessly. I interviewed this man. He was 85 years old, and he's very lucid. And there was nothing wrong with his memory, but he emotionally said they were human. I mean, he was just stunned still. And by that, I mean they were humanoid, and that does not mean they were grays. They didn't have great big eyes. Their eyes were normal, but a little bit further apart. You see that in the general population. They would fit into the population just dandy, okay? And so I'm not trying to tell anybody there aren't any other kinds of things like reptilians and all this stuff. I have no evidence of those things whatsoever. I needed some kind of information that would provide me some rational explanations for some of the things I was finding, and then I had to find more things to verify that what I was beginning to think was right, or if there's nothing I could find, then I'm going to have to dump it. I'll put it in a grab bag. So the 2-seat thing is like, forget it, you know. And there were no 4 bodies. They were living, breathing life forms. They were in flight suits, okay, which is kind of a joke on the last craft. The flight suit thing, and they communicated with the retrieval team. Oh my gosh, they communicated, and the Air Force had to get them out of there. There's no cabs coming to pick up anybody out on the middle of no place, and they are top secret. And everybody has to understand, top secret means you can't have them go down and pose their pictures in the newspaper. And so they loaded them up, and they took them out. And the only thing that I have, first person from somebody on site, was that the only thing that they were requesting or implying is that they would go willingly, but at no time be separated. Okay? Can I prove that? That person that told me that, and I've interviewed, is deceased. Okay? But I've had more than one of my first-hand eyewitnesses describe them as human or humanoid. They were not reptilian or grays and that kind of thing. So I hope that helps.
Now they did they not end up in the custody of the sheriff in the basement jail?
Well, here's a humdinger.
I bet it is.
Yeah, yeah. This is where it's like I didn't expect really to find anything like I found, like a complete landing site with relics from the Air Force that are identifiable, you know, as experimental things only made once and for them under government contract. And it's like, this stuff, it's everywhere. And so I'm adjusting to the idea pardon me, that I've actually found evidence it really is real. And so the next thing I have is this the Red Lake thing, and a curator that spent 20 years looking for something, and then visual evidence and stuff from drones, and then the rock piles out in the desert where the Air Force left rock piles where they dug up the ground to get the rest of the ship out. It's still there, and then I thought, this is it, and it was just because of my research. And I'm going through some documents that I had just gotten, and something really strange came up, and it happened 2 days later. And right in front of everyone in Old Town Kingman, a disc came down, watched by a couple of dozen people that I'm able to determine, but maybe everybody in town, and it slammed right into the north face of the Wallapai Mountain. And the mountain is like, at the peak, is 8,256 feet high. It looks like the Rockies. It's beautiful. Timbered, heavily timbered, elk, everything. And it sets the mountain on fire. This is May 24th, 1953. It never rained one drop in the month of May, 1953, in Kingman. There was never a lightning storm, nothing. And at the source of the fire, it's burning out of control. 1953 fire efforts to try to stop a fire. They've got big metal tubs of water soaking gunny sacks in it and pounding the burning grass to stop grass burning. And they have shovels. And there's some of the guys that have the latest equipment are copper or brass tanks on their back with water and a hand pump and a hose on the front, bent around the front so you could pump this handle to squirt on the fire. And they're waiting for a bulldozer. There's a Forest Service man arrives with more supplies for the work crews that are fighting the fire. It's about 84 degrees. It's not big heat wave like today, 103 plus here. And above the fire, there's part of the rescue team, the retrieval team. They're dragging 2 corpses out and pieces of the crafts. And then the fire, because fire burns up a hill, they have to evacuate because the fire is starting to overtake them, and they could end up being severely injured or killed. So they have to evacuate. They got 2 people. They don't know anything else about who else might be in the craft. The Forest Service worker comes up, and right near the fire at the source, where the craft hit the mountain, there are 2 individuals aimlessly wandering around like they're lost. They're wearing coveralls, flight suits. And the Forest Service worker becomes suspicious, and he walks over to them to talk to them because they don't have any business there. And he talks to them and asks them what they're doing, who they are, and they won't speak to him. He finally becomes suspicious that they might be arsons. So he takes them into custody. This is being watched by a news reporter off to the side, and with a pad and pencil writing down what's going on. The fire just started, and he writes down that the Forest Service worker has just taken, listen to this, quote, 2 strange-looking men into custody.
This gets wilder and wilder.
Yeah,
and
they
we're
go to
going
the sheriff's
continue.
office. Yep.
We're going to continue after a brief break, and we've got some more listener questions, and I've got a few more questions myself. So we'll be back shortly with Harry Drew and Rick Hilberg.
Exploring the bizarre. Every Thursday night at 7 p.m. Pacific, 10 p.m. Eastern. Now back to exploring the bizarre with 2 of the most electrifying researchers in the paranormal. Your hosts, Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz.
You know, I hate to admit it, I've never been in a chat room. But I'm lucky to be the co-host on one of the most fabulous radio networks going, KCOR Digital Radio Network. And our guest tonight, Harry Drew, talking about the Kingman UFO crash, not crash, I use that in quotes, retrieval, along with the alien occupants. And Rick Hilberg, who I salute from Cleveland, Ohio, my old buddy. And, of course, Tim Swartz out there in Jasper, Indiana. And, Rick, I've got a few questions here from the listeners, but I know you must be biting off your fingernails and wanting to ask a few questions. Yes.
Well, I'm just fascinated by what Harry is saying. But and one point that I like to make, and I'll try to make it briefly, so that get the questions in from the listeners out there, is Harry's 85-year-old witness who was astonished to say, these things were human. They were human. To me, that's quite significant because in many of the early cases, we're not necessarily talking about crash retrieval cases, but ufonaut cases, people spotting, the creatures or beings from the UFOs, flying saucers, call them what you want. They are generally described as being human in appearance. It's not until the late 1960s, early 1970s, wherein you get the grays and some of these other bizarre creatures, coming into the scene. So to me, that's quite significant because it is going with consistent witness testimony, at that time. So I think that's quite, and I'm fascinated to listen to Harry. I just, you're laying it all right out there and giving us a chronology, and it's fascinating.
This kind of brings us to the question from UFO John. He wants to know, could this crash have been one of the Nazi bells, as many of their scientists have been brought over to the USA, and we know they had been working on that technology. Now, this is something that I've started to consider, and I'm not the guest tonight, so I don't want to get into this, but I have a feeling that some of these early UFO crashes may have involved some technology that was brought over here by these German and Nazi scientists, which was developed perhaps on information that they had channeled from some extraterrestrial source. What is your feeling about that, Harry?
Is this directed to me?
It is, yes.
No. The answer is, were these extracts from some scientific development by the Nazi Germans? No. These were also, as claimed by another person, these were also not the creation of the Japanese, whose last-ditch effort to try to do anything was either by kamikaze or balloon bombs made out of rice paper. No, these crafts were, from all purposes that I can see, even though humanoid in appearance, were not local family, and the craft themselves were exported from a place beyond our outer atmosphere.
Mm-hmm. Now you mentioned that while you were investigating the Kingman incidents, that you had a number of things that happened to you involving a black shadow being that skimmed along the ground. You had objects and helicopters that seemed to be hovering nearby, or perhaps following your pursuits.
Out of respect for Yogi Berra, it ain't over till it's over, and that's the way it's working. But I would like to tail off the last part of the last thing that happened on the 24th of May, 1953. The Forest Service worker took two strange-looking men. Ask yourself, why would a reporter say something like that? Why? And I'm constantly asking, how do you know that? What did you do to find out? And so here it is. A reporter follows the Forest Service worker and two ETs in custody down to the 1915 Mojave County Courthouse, where the sheriff's office is located. And there's a long story just about how I found that after 60 years, because I assumed it was torn down. Everybody told me it was torn down. But it was in the basement of the courthouse on the northwest corner, below grade. It's been off limits for 30 years to people. The court still uses the building for trials. It's beautiful. It's a historic place. And but there's no access to the lower part because the court uses it for trial business. I went to the head of security for the Mojave County Court, and I had this paper I found. It included a description of inside the sheriff's office. And I didn't say I'm a wacko doing UFO stories or anything else that would upset all these people that are used to security and have guns and all these things. And so I went, and they took me to the head of security, and I said, I'd like to tell you something about the 1953 Mojave County Sheriff's Office, and if I'm right, if you just tell me yes or no, I don't need anything else because I know I can't go in there. And so he said yes, and I told him all about it, that I had, the points that I wanted to mention. And he said, follow me. And he unlocked the security door and turned off an alarm. We went to the first door to the old sheriff's office, and they did it again, and another locked door. It's two locked doors to get into the sheriff's office where the deputies are. And inside of there are 2 detention rooms, later called what they are, interrogation rooms. They are solid concrete vaults with 1 door in and out that comes out to where the deputies are. The sheriff was out. This is a small town, okay, on a day, and the sheriff's got 9 deputies, one's an under sheriff, and it's 180,000 square miles to cover, okay? So they put the deputy puts the 2 crew members in a detention room, the western one, and there's an oak bench and chair that were outside the door, and he sent another deputy to go get the sheriff, and the Forest Service worker sat down on the oak chair that's still there by the door, and I went in and was allowed to photograph it, including the room where these guys, or these strange-looking men, were put. When the sheriff comes back, he was briefed by the Forest Service worker, told he thinks it's arson. They've got a fire out of control. It burns out of control for well past a week. It just keeps getting bigger. And so the sheriff, Frank Porter, says, open up. And the deputy opened the door, and the sheriff stepped in, and the Forest Service worker stepped in, and the deputy stepped in, and there was no one in the room anymore. It was empty, and Harry Houdini could not get out of that room. I've been in it. And so the reporter's like outside, he can't get in. He knows people there, but he can't get in because it's like something's going on with people that are incarcerated. And of course, the sheriff, a deputy writes down, they've got 2 people who won't talk. They won't speak to anybody, and they're holding them for the sheriff. The police write down things when they can't just hold people and not say anything. Even in 1953, they were very careful about that. And so the reporter writes down, and they vanished. Yeah. So anyway, yeah. I had a lot of things happen that I really don't talk about because I don't want to damage the credibility of the facts about this. And it's like somebody said, well, what, have you ever reported this? Did you call MUFON, or did you call do this, do that? No, I'm a historian. I'm writing a history, and if it's modern history or if it's ancient history, I'm not going to get a hold of the Emperor of Rome or anybody else. And in this, I've already had enough copyright infringements that anything I say that goes very far out, I'm seeing it, including my own video with all my copyright stripped out of it, and sometimes still has my narration. And so I can't do that and be able to put everything together and present my package about things you can go verify for yourself. Okay, instead of being intermixed with a bunch of fairy tales. So no, I haven't reported this. I have no intention. I'm a historian. I'm not. My job isn't to report to somebody about I saw a UFO, or any of that stuff. We do not report UFOs here right now. Nobody is reporting UFOs here. Why would we do that? They're here all the time. You want to see them? Come here. It just works that way. Don't ask me where to go stand. Don't ask me where the sites are. I won't send you there. You can't go there. The property, there are things called property rights. There are things where places are restricted because it's in a government, like a protected area to begin with. You can't go in there and just start digging up holes. But this is the kind of stuff that's happening, and I'm not in it for the money. I've been accused of that in writing and big warnings to me and all this stuff. I'm a historian. I'm just doing history. And, I'm not a monk who spends a lifetime doing one book that he copies. Okay? I'm just spending this much time on this, and then I've got follow-up. The black thing, I'm up halfway on the side of the Rocky Butte. This is a very tall hill made of loose rock, fist size to bowling ball size, and you have to go up sideways if you're a human to climb up this because you're looking for footing where, one, there isn't a Mojave green rattlesnake, or something along that line, and your foot goes down on ground enough to keep you from sliding and falling down this butte. And it's like about 110 degrees. I've got 90 pounds of equipment. I'm about 2 miles plus or minus from my Jeep because my Jeep can't go any further. I have to walk in. And I'm halfway up, and something catches the peripheral vision of my right eye, and I look down, and it's a perfectly clear day. And right at the base of the hill, because they shoot up right out of the desert floor. I mean, it's come right out of the ground. So there's not like a long sloping hill. And this thing, it's like, my first impression was it was a person, or it's bipedal. It's vertical, slightly stooped about where we would think of our shoulders. So the head's kind of like bent a little. It's black. You can't see through it. It's like in the time of day when the sun isn't going to be an interference. And I look, and this thing is not walking. There's no leg motion. It's skimming along the ground. And I look close, and I can see light under the ground, under it. Okay, so it's not even touching the ground, and it's moving along like you'd be on ice, or like on ice skates or something, and a cloak, so you can't see. And nobody has to believe this. It doesn't matter. This was in 2008, and this thing isn't casting a shadow. Well, okay, it's black, maybe, and I look, and everything else is casting a shadow that would be in that respective course. And then I look, and it's headed directly towards my Jeep, and I had this sudden grab in the stomach going, if it damages my Jeep, I'm out of cell range. It's 110. I only have the water that's on me, and I'm going to be in a jam here because I thought about trying to go down the hill. And I looking at the speed, I calculated instantly, there's no way I'd even get to the base of the hill, the butte, before this thing got to my Jeep. So I decided, come with me, I'm halfway up this thing, and it's torturous climb. And I went on it to the top. I personally examined and photographed the ejecta from the red light craft where it hit, augured in slightly, and then blew out, turned and blew out rock. From where it ricocheted off the hill, and took a 360 in movie film and a 360 in still motion photography, like 3500 or 3800 pixel from my Nikon, so I get a record of everything there, including this place. I photographed the area below me, but there was nothing there anymore. It was not until later doing a radio show, I didn't know anything about shadow beings or any of that. I've never even heard of them. And just this, when I drove out with my Jeep, when I finally got back and I was starting to put equipment away, the Jeep is covered with sun-baked dirt. And on the hood, on the passenger side, is this big symbol. It wasn't there when I left. And it's right through all of the burnt-on gook from being out in the desert. And it's like the Jeep is black shiny paint, where this symbol or emblem is. And I looked at that, and I went and got a camera, and I photographed the hood, because this isn't normal either. And then I was putting stuff away, and I have a camera in the Jeep, all times coming out of these desolate areas. If something happens, I talk to the camera and tell the camera the last place I was and what I was doing as a record. It's either for me or whoever finds me. And what I say coming out of there is dangerous place. That's the way I felt about everything involved, what I had just seen. And I was doing an interview, and this was brought up to me about black shadow beings, and the person had done a book. And I went, wow. And so they said, when did you see this? And they, I think, did the book in 2011 or something. And I said, well, this is 2008. It's like on film and video from even inside the Jeep. And that was part of the beginning. The engineer and I were out at the main landing site, so we could do the drone flights and all of this and get a record. And I did a 360 on tripod with movie camera and still photos, so the whole area is recorded. People may not understand that, but the next time there's a forest fire, it's going to look different. Okay, that kind of thing. And there are now trees as high as 15 feet there, and you can see the vegetation growth climbing up this very low, very slow area that comes down off the mountain where water migrates down, and so the vegetation is migrating up the hill as far as it'll go until the climate change again. But beginning with that, and beginning with an incident that happened up at the site, a bit of a confrontation that was completely odd. It wasn't until we both went home, and he doesn't live at Kingman. He lives somewhere else, quite a ways off. And I went out for a slow down walk from doing all this all day long, out around. I have horse property out in the desert. My backyard opens up to 35 miles of open desert, where I see a lot of things, make your hair stand up. And I'm out doing this walk, and I finished about 4 miles, and I was about to go back in, and I look about 6 miles away, 5 to 6 miles away. There's this massive, it's still daylight, by the way. There's this massive thing sitting below the surbats, okay? And in other words, you can see the mountains above it. So it's low, and it's brilliant lights under it. And I thought at first, just a natural response, it must be something like 3 big helicopters with like 2 million power candle lights or whatever. And I looked, and there was no oscillation in the lights. It was one thing, not 3. And I went in to get a camera, came back out, it was gone. I turned to go back, and it moved 3 miles away from me. It had moved up. And then it did a horseshoe arc and came around over my backyard, right over my head. Burned out my digital camera, okay? And some other stuff. So who knows what present I got. But I thought it was a triangular craft. This is daytime. It's about 400 feet off the ground, okay? I'm not the only person that saw this, luckily. And about 400 feet off the ground, and it acted like a hockey puck sliding across ice. And then it did a rotation over me to where what looked like what we would think of the nose, kind of pointed. And it turned, and as it did, and the sun is starting to go down at the same time, off to the west of me. And as it did, I saw daylight where I thought there was mass, because the lights are so bright, I'm wearing like polarized dark lenses, and I'm squinting for real. And I look up, and I can see sky. And it's a V-shaped craft of some kind. It's huge. And one appendage on the left side, which catches on the inside is catching the sunset. It's all charcoal black color with burnt orange and yellow, the sunset, right down the middle of it. There's no windows, no doors, no antenna. It was close enough to see. And the thing just slid off, nose pointed towards like Needles, California, and it just went off, disappearing out of sight. Didn't go fast, just kind of rolled out. And so I headed back in the house. The phone's ringing. It's the engineer calling, and he's saying, "You're not going to believe it." And I said, "What?" And he said, "I just had a huge V-shaped UFO hovering over my house leave about an hour ago." And I said, "It just left here." Okay. And so, but nighttime things happen. I've got daytime things. The underground base, something's going on, because I can't tell you what, but 4, 6, or 8 in number per flight. Apache A-64 armed, visibly they're carrying they've got the guns on the carriages outside of them, are flying in. They come across the back of my horse property, and they have the tone. I've flown choppers, and they're heavy. They're coming in heavy, and they go out light. Okay, so the rotor chop is just really pounding when they go by. They fly right by. I've got all kinds of photos, and then locked up, out of sight, trying to determine what to do with it later, and multiple authentic photos of where I was shooting bursts with my Nikon, and of a flight of 8, and a disc, perfectly clear. This isn't FX stuff. Flew right into them and through them. And I have it on film. Daytime. Okay? So nighttime stuff is weird. You know.
Was this the incident where the security camera caught the materialization of the object?
Say again.
Was this the incident involving the security camera which caught the materialization of the object?
That's up at the site.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That was after my first being buzzed by an airplane by myself when I was up there, and I had a camera on a tripod, and the landmark, I'm standing with the landmark behind me, and I'm talking to the camera. Okay. I'm doing two things. I'm doing narration as a record. This is a record of what I'm doing. And because I'm doing research, I'm not here to go hug this thing, but there it is. And so I'm on a 1912 wagon road in the middle of nowhere. There's no cell signals. There's no water. There's no traffic.
We're down to the last minute, unfortunately.
Yeah. Okay. So anyway.
All right. Well, Harry, where can people get in touch with you and get your video and find out about your forthcoming book and your lectures and so forth?
I hope to release, I'll decide. I may release the first book for Christmas, just because it would be good to have for that. The new documentary won't be done my way until early next year, 2016. There are two things I have done that give you a whole load of information. They're available through Amazon. If you go to Kingman UFO crashes.com, there are links to all kinds of things and a whole slug of real photos of real places that I've been, so you can believe what I'm saying. There
is a link that goes directly from KCOR to your site. Now, Rick, thank you for coming on as a panelist this evening and chiming in. How can people get your fantastic Flying Saucer Digest that you've been publishing now for, how many years?
Since '67, it's been published.
Mm-hmm. I know they can contact you on Facebook. That information,
Facebook?
That information is up on the site. And give the address out real quick.
Okay, free sample copy. Write me at 377 Race, RACE Street, Berea, BEREA, Ohio, 44017. I'll send you a sample copy.
Well, this has been a marvelous evening indeed. And I think this is the Kingman UFO incident. I'm going to try to stop calling it a crash. It's probably one of the most fascinating that I've ever come across. And you got to give credit to Harry. He's a great UFO historian, that is.
It's great.
Here.
Yes, indeed. And continue on, man. Let us. We're going to have you on at least every 6 months or so we can be caught up on what's going on with your research and down there in Kingman. And I'll meet you sometime at the Dairy Queen when I'm out there. And Tim Swartz, thanks again. And we'll be back next week. Our scheduled guest is Sean Castile, who will be talking about the search for the Pale Prophet in ancient America. And once again, listen to all the fantastic shows on the KCOR Digital Radio Network.
You've been listening to Exploring the Bizarre with hosts Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz. They're taking back the night by jetting non-stop across the cosmos in search of the truly bizarre and totally unexplained, with you as their co-pilot. Thursday nights at 7 p.m. Pacific, 10 p.m. Eastern, on the KCOR Digital Radio Network. For more information on Exploring the Bizarre and hosts Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz, check out their KCOR Digital Radio Network page. Follow their YouTube channel at MRUFO 1100, Exploring the Bizarre.